Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Today we're taking a look at Rise to Power from 8th Games. This is a futuristic city building card game. You are trying to make a city as efficiently and as green as possible. You're trying to do this by making different districts and upgrading districts, and generally just trying to get as many points as possible. More points, of course, than the other players. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played, then we'll come back. I'll let you know what I think. The goal of Rise to Power is to get the most victory points by building up your futuristic city district. The game is going to end in one of two ways. Either you cannot refill the contract area up here. When that happens, everyone's going to get one more turn. Or if someone has built 8 different districts in their own city, then the game is going to end at the end of that round. So every player is going to start off with a power plant, and the important bit about the power plant is that it'll tell you your starting stats, essentially. So this first one is how many cards you draw from the Prism Deck whenever you would draw. This is your hand limit, and this is how many sectors or districts you can have in your city total. And you're going to illustrate those on your player mat. Your player mat, you'll have these little black discs that you'll put on the appropriate stats. It'll actually tell you where they start off at. And those will go up and down as you build more districts and get more bonuses. And it'll also tell you what your turn order is and what you can do with your actions. Now this is the contract area. These are the actual things that you can build, the districts you can build in your city, but right now they're just contracts. If you can actually get these into your hands and then power them with Prism, you can turn them into districts, which will give you victory points as well as more bonuses on your player aid. So this one will actually increase your ability to have districts by 2, whereas if you look at offshore here, this one is going to increase your district size, but also your hand limit, and it gives you 6 victory points. But right now, those are just contracts. Now over here, there's a couple things of note. First, you have agendas. Agendas are like achievements that players are vying towards. Anyone can potentially take one of these, and you can take multiple of them if you're eligible for them. You just have to meet the conditions. So the Harbor Master here says you have to be the first to have the marina or marina, how do you say that? Marina? Whatever. Seaport and the island. This one says be the first to upgrade 3 districts, and I'll get to that in a moment. Over here you have the Prism Deck, and the Prism Deck is going to be made up of 3 different colors of cards, and there's also some special Kickstarter wild cards or whatever. I'm not really going to look for those. But they're different denominations, and these are the currency that you're going to use in order to build, fuel the districts, power them, and so once you put a contract in your city, you can use Prism in order to make it into a real live boy or sector, as it were. So then the last thing I'll show you is the exchange. This card just sort of signifies where you should be placing the exchange. And what this is that you can actually use contracts for their special abilities instead of actually making them into a sector in your district. So if you look at the island here, that little box of text in the middle is what you'll do if you use it in the exchange. So this one says, choose a rival's contract. They may power it, search the deck for a same named contract and acquire it. And then down here is the Prism cost if you're actually going to build the sector. But when you put something on the exchange, you're simply going to line it up here. And there could theoretically be an infinite amount of cards in the exchange, but at the end of every player's turn, these are automatically going to power and be districts that players can just acquire from then on out without actually being able to use them for their contract abilities. So let's go through the different things that players can do on their turn. Well, the first thing that you must do on your turn is acquire 2 contracts. So you're always going to have 4 contracts to take from the center here. They don't refill automatically. They actually don't refill until the end of your turn. So whatever's out here is all that you have. You have to take 2 of them, and then you're going to place them into your city. Now, they're not built yet. These are just like the promise of future sectors being built. They always have to be lined up next to either your power plants or next to other contracts that you already have, or completed sectors, either way. But you're always going to line them up like that. And remember, you have to follow the limit of whatever your sector limit is based on how much power that you have. And I don't know why I just grabbed 3 there. I was just illustrating how you place the cards. But you should only have 2 after the first phase of your turn. Then it's time to use your actions. This is an action point allotment game, so every player is going to have 2 AP, 2 action points, that they can use to use any of the 6 different types of actions. And you can do the same action more than once if you like, but you only have the 2 action points to spend. So one of the things you can do is to draw Prism cards. Now you're going to start off with 2 Prism cards. And when you go to draw more, you always follow whatever your draw limit is at this point. So at the beginning of the game, it's only going to be 2, but you can expect that that's going to grow higher during the course of the game. Remember, you have to respect your hand limit as well. At the end of the round, you might have to discard down to whatever your hand limit is. The other thing you can do is power a contract. So one of the contracts that you've already placed out into your grid, I'm starting to get the terminology right. You can try and get whatever the limit there, the prism cost is, and discard that amount of prism from your hand of the appropriate color in order to power that contract. Now, here's one of the little quirky things of the game. Actually, one of the focal points of the game is it promotes efficiency because you're supposed to be like a clean running city. So what that means is that if you can meet the cost of a contract by exact count, you will actually gain an extra action point. There are other things that will give you action points as well, especially putting cards out into the exchange, but this is one of the cooler ways that you can get that. So if I was able, this card cost me 9 green prism in order to power it. If I was to get exactly 9 on that, then I would, in addition to powering it immediately, well, at the end of the game, having those victory points, whatever bonuses this gives me in my district, I would also get an extra action point that I can spend right away. If you overshoot the amount, you get nothing. You still power it as normal, you get the abilities, you're not penalized, but you're not going to get that extra action point either. The next type of thing you can do is upgrade a district. Now, what upgrades mean is that you can actually take existing cards that you've already built and simply stack them up in order to save space in your grid, but also to give you bonus points. You actually get an extra bonus point for every extra level of an upgrade that you have. But you have to build them from highest to lowest. So in this case, I would have to have, based on the victory points, so I'd have to have this 5-point island here. And then if I had already powered, or I'm sorry, if I had a contract for this 4-point island, I would, using this action, I would immediately power it, which means you have to follow the same rules for powering. You have to power it with prism cards, and then stack it on top of this 5-pointer. So it takes up less space, and it's worth an extra point, as well as its own base points as well. The next thing you can do is use an exchange ability, and remember, to use an exchange ability, you have to already have a contract that has not been powered in your grid. Put it in the exchange, do the special ability, which will give you, might give you more action points, usually gives you more action points, and then you can maybe take extra cards, get more prism cards, and so on. You can take from the exchange. So let's say that someone had already played a contract on a previous turn to use the exchange. At the end of everyone's turn, whatever contracts are sitting in the exchange power up automatically. So now you can use one of your action points to just take that and put it into your district. Normal rules for placement still apply, and you can upgrade it right away, but you can also get the victory points at the end of the game. And the last thing you can do is challenge a contract. This is very simply looking at another player's tableau and looking at the contracts that they have not yet powered and deciding, I want that. And you simply spend an amount of prism equal to what you would normally have to spend anyways, although if you meet it by exact count this time, you don't get an extra action point, not for taking someone else's stuff. But if you can successfully power it, you can theoretically take their contract and put it in front of you as a powered district. However, the defending player has a chance to defend by immediately powering it themselves. So in other words, if they had been holding back, or maybe at the end of their turn they ended up, their last action was getting them enough prism to actually power it, they just didn't have the actions to do it, they can immediately do it in response and leave it in their grid. You cannot take it from them. You've essentially wasted your action point. So those are the types of actions you can take. Remember, you normally get 2 action points. Then you have the cleanup phase where you discard, refill, power the exchange, put more cards out here, and so on. This is going to continue until each player, either you cannot fill up the contracts anymore, or someone has built 8 districts in their grid. At that point, you're going to add up all the points that you have for the powered districts in your city, and also any points you get for upgrades and the extra bonus points, and perhaps any of the agendas that you've managed to complete as well. So that's the base game. Let's just take a look at a few of the extra expansions you might integrate into it. The first optional expansion you have are CEOs. There's a bunch of different CEOs you can possibly choose from. You're going to deal one out to each player or have players choose them at the beginning. This is going to give you an active trait that you have access to during the course of the game. That little lightning bolt symbols mean you can spend an action point in order to use this trait. This one says, choose a contract on your grid and discard it. Search the deck for a same named contract and acquire it. Once you do that, however, you flip the card over and now you have a passive trait, which is when acquiring a contract, you may choose to acquire from the top card of the contract deck instead. The next type type of expansion you have are these Prism Pylons. These are all the same. You'll deal one out to each player, and essentially what can happen is players can spend an action point in order to stow a Prism card underneath this card. They can do this up to 3 times. So they can have a maximum of 3 Prism Pylons underneath this. For every card that they have stowed here, they get a discount on future Prism costs for things that they're trying to do. And the last type of expansion, at least it's worth mentioning, are these government contract cards. These are cards that you build them the same as you would other districts into your city. However, they require 2 different types of Prism costs, but they're usually worth quite a few more victory points. They follow the same rules for placement as well. You can also put these in exchange like other cards. However, they usually have a detrimental effect so long as they sit in the exchange. So this one says, while in the exchange, all players draw powers too. You actually do not power these as normal at the end of a player's turn. Oh, actually, there is one last type of expansion to talk about. You have these corporate agenda cards. Now, the odd thing here, and the rulebook is very unclear on this, is that if you play with up to 6 players in this game, you actually are forced to use a couple of these because you don't have enough normal agendas. You have to have an agenda for each player. But what these agendas function in the same way. Whenever you can meet whatever their condition is, like this one says gain 3 additional action points in a turn, you'll be able to take this and you'll get those amount of points at the beginning of the game. However, when you take this, you can also use its ability at the bottom. So you can spend an action point and discard the agenda and then get whatever the special ability is. Like this one says search the deck for a contract and acquire and shuffle the deck. Acquire it, shuffle the deck, you may power the acquired contract. So just a different type of agenda that you have access to. That is essentially Rise to Power. Let's get to my final thoughts. I always start off with components and theme, and I think the components in this game are pretty solid. I mean, it's just a card game. There's not a lot of elaborate stuff here, no miniatures or anything like that, but I really love the artwork and the graphic design, and they did try their best to make all of that integrate into the theme about being efficient and clean, and it definitely gives that appearance. And they did put a little art book into the box with a little short story, and I appreciate that they tried to go that extra mile. And there are a couple elements of the game that seem just a little bit thematic. You have the idea of, the main idea I would say, of hitting the prism cost of a card by exact count, and therefore being very efficient and getting an extra action point, which really is very, very useful in the game. But at this point, that's where I'm going to stop saying nice things about Rise to Power, because there really isn't anything else nice to say. That little bit of theme is all you're going to get out of this game. The rest of it feels like an incredibly dry, disconnected card game. You will never ever feel like you are actually building a city, because where you place cards in your city doesn't matter. Like, almost at all. You start off with your power plant, you're putting cards around it, but then you can put them around the other cards that you build as well, or just make upgrades. In fact, most of the time, the limitation that you have on how many cards you can have in your grid, how many sectors you can have in your grid, will never even come into play, or barely. This does not feel like a city building game. It feels like a set collection game. And at one point I was just like, well, if they just changed the theme to you have floating cities and floating buildings, we wouldn't even have to deal with this nonsense of trying to put cards into a grid that doesn't matter. So my main issue with the game is simply that the theme is completely irrelevant. But on top of that, this is also an incredibly long and drawn out game for what it's supposed to be. This is supposed to be a very quick hand management game, and that's one of the reasons why I was so intrigued by it. Games like Suburbia city building games didn't really work for me. I know I'm in the minority on that, but they felt very dry, they felt very fiddly. I thought that this would be a good replacement for that, but really, I'd rather play a game of Suburbia that will probably be done in the same amount of time as Rise to Power, despite being a much smaller game. There's so much downtime between people's turns. Maybe it's not that the game is really long, but that it's just that it feels incredibly long. I would never, ever recommend playing this with more than 3 players. And the fact that the box says you can play with up to 6 is a travesty. Do not ever do that. It's not just that turns or rounds are incredibly long, waiting for someone to get stuck in analysis paralysis, deciding what cards to take either from the exchange or deciding what abilities to use or precious action points on. But the fact is, there is no planning whatsoever. None. That just exacerbates that situation. By the time things get back around to you, even frankly in a 3-player game, everything will be different. There's such a limited stock of contracts out on the board, you can guarantee that nothing that you want is going to be there, especially with more players in the game. So it gets around to your turn and you're like, well, okay, let me take the time and read all the new cards that are out here, because these are the only ones I've seen since the last time I had my turn. And then there's the cards in the exchange, and it's such a weird and it's not very conducive to you getting through the game and making it smooth and efficient. And the game is supposed to be about efficiency, and that is the last thing I was thinking about. To add to that, there's just a lot of clunky mechanisms, like, well, okay, I could make a really strong effort to play a lot of Prism cards and put down to power another contract into my district, or to build it, however you want to say it. But I could just take that card there that's in the exchange that's worth 5 or 6 victory points. And, okay, yeah, I'm not going to get any kind of special bonus for having done that, but who cares? That's a very strange thing. And in order for that to happen, someone would have had, on a previous turn, would have had to say, well, if I use this in the exchange, I'm going to get a very powerful ability. And remember, I do like that idea. But by putting that in there, you're just setting someone else up to take it who is just going to get easy points. Maybe it's someone that's already pretty far ahead. In fact, that, coupled with the fact that there's no forward planning in the game whatsoever, means that in at least one of the games that I played, someone won who was like, I won? Really? Because I really felt like I had no idea what I was really doing or was effective the entire time. That person, she was as surprised as anyone that she won, because that's what this game leads to. You are simply just doing the best thing you can when your turn comes around, hoping it kind of works and hoping you have more points than everyone else at the end. So this was a big fail for us. It's too long. It's too disconnected from any kind of theme or story whatsoever. There's lots of clunkiness, the cards, and figuring out what everything does. There are little expansion packs that come in the box, like little add-ons like the Pylons and the extra characters that give you a special ability. None of them fix any of the fundamental flaws with the game and are just extra layers of fiddliness that, for such a small and supposed to be quick card game, I wouldn't want to deal with. So this is a big pass for me. Could have been great, so far from great. Rise to power from Ape Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.